We've known for months that the battle for Bakhmut and the area around it was brutal, bloody and fought inch by inch.
Перебежал дальше в Бахмут.
But John has a visceral first-hand account tonight of what it is really like to live and fight on the front line.
The Russians have been close and getting closer for a long time, but right now there is at least a hope that they've exhausted themselves. The sounds you can hear, that's the sound of Ukrainian artillery, and it's hitting into Bakhmut.
Staying alive is a matter of everyday chance, and the Ukrainians do seem to be edging the Russians back. But it is a slow and painstaking and uncertain business, and we still do not know when, where, or even if the spring offensive will begin. The Ukrainian president was here, meanwhile, to ask for more weapons. So what will we give him? Also on News at 10 tonight. Is there such a thing as greedflation, using the cost of living crisis as an excuse to bolster profits? And are the petrol companies guilty of it? Erdogan emerges ahead, but Turkey's tense election goes down to the wire. Read about the sewage before you swim in it, a new weekly testing regime. But how much difference will it actually make? And
say again, please. Houston, we have a problem.
Tom Hanks on how AI might change Hollywood forever.
You know, I could be hit by a bus tomorrow, and that's it. But my performances can go on and on and on and on and on.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. For months, the war in Ukraine has raged around and through a single place, Bakhmut. The Russians have ploughed enormous amounts of men, money and munitions into a so far failed attempt to capture a city, the strategic importance of which is not entirely clear. You could almost say it has become a symbol of Moscow's disastrous miscalculation. But what has not been in doubt has been the brutality of the fighting in Bakhmut itself, where daily advances and retreats appear to have been measured in yards. Time and again its fall has been predicted, but somehow the Ukrainians have held on and even now appear to be again advancing. Tonight, John Ray has a vivid first-hand account of what it is like to be a soldier fighting on that front line, where a life cut brutally short is an ever-present possibility.
This is the hell on earth that is Bakhmut. The longest battle of the war. Its name was unknown outside Ukraine 6 months ago, but the war has put the town on the map
Перебежал дальше в Бахмут.
and is now obliterating it. It is a place of constant gunfire and explosions, where snipers shelter in shattered buildings. And in battered streets, Ukrainian forces fight back. These pictures, filmed for ITV News, show them trying to evacuate a wounded comrade. Then the whistle of another Russian shell. It lands unnervingly close. The difference between life and death is measured by such slender margins. But as the uneven rhythm of this war gathers pace, it is here the Russians have been halted and in places turned back. Though veterans like Skiv know it is painful, uncertain progress.
How's it going, guys?
Not bad.
Yeah?
It's a war, you see, and no one knows what's going to happen in a minute, you see.
Do the Russians still fire back a lot?
A lot.
A lot.
A lot. They shoot all day, all night, 24 hours.
The fighting has swallowed up the neighboring town of Chasiv Yar. where we dash across the gaps between buildings that offer cover.
The Russians have been close and getting closer for a long time, but right now there is at least a hope that they've exhausted themselves. The sounds you can hear, that's the sound of Ukrainian artillery, and it's hitting into Bakhmut.
We climb to the upper floors of a ruined apartment block, where 2 Ukrainian soldiers scan the sky, ready to shoot down Russian helicopters. Later, a Ukrainian warplane circles, searching for a target. In these woods, they hunt Russians too. And all the while, Russians are hunting them. But for the first time in months, Ukrainians here sent more than the mere chance of victory.
Are you winning territory back from the Russians?
We are fighting back, not quickly, and it's not a big area, but we are slowly moving forward.
Beyond the tree line, with Russian drones overhead, it's not safe to linger. So hunter and hunted alike, both hide in the earth. A world of cigarettes, sweet drinks and sharp eyes directing the fire. There's smoke from a Ukrainian shell. It misses a Russian trench. So the crew adjusts their aim. And this time score a direct hit. Theirs is a gun supplied by Britain. They tell us they will need more and much bigger weapons to liberate their country.
In artillery terms, this unit is almost toe-to-toe with the Russians. It is a relentless and bloody struggle. And if you think that the front line stretches 900 miles, then you understand the monumental scale of the task facing the Ukrainians.
Back in Chasiv Yar, the few civilians left watch the changing tides of war. Sergei nurses a shrapnel wound.
Do you worry?
Let the Russians be afraid, he says. It's a time for strong nerves. Only the dogs can afford to flinch. John Ray, News at 10, Eastern Ukraine.
Well, for months now, the war in Ukraine has been at a standstill, with both sides struggling to make any significant gains. Much of the fighting, as we just saw in John's report, has centred on the city of Bakhmut, where US intelligence estimates around 100,000 Russians have been killed or injured in the past 5 months. So why is Russia plunging so much resource into taking the city? After all, even before the war, it had a population of just 70,000. There was only limited value in its transport infrastructure, and with no major military bases, you could hardly say that Bakhmut holds much strategic value. However, it does lie in the way of Russia capturing the wider Donbass region and the value that would bring to pride and morale. As for Ukraine, it suits them quite effectively for the Russians to continue ploughing huge amounts of equipment and troops into Bakhmut, draining enemy manpower and resources ahead of a widely expected spring counteroffensive. No one knows for sure where or even when it will come, but one theory is that Ukraine will strike south from Zaporizhzhia, where they'll try to divide the Russian-controlled territory currently connecting the Black Sea port in Crimea to the rest of Russia. But any such counter-offensive needs weapons and indeed warplanes, and today Volodymyr Zelensky came to Britain to push for a fighter jets coalition.
Arriving in Chequers by Chinook helicopter, an unannounced visit by the Ukrainian president to one of his staunchest allies.
You are actually the first foreign leader that I've had the privilege of welcoming here as Prime Minister.
You did a lot, your government and His Majesty, the King, and of course your people, your society. We're very thankful from all our hearts.
But Volodymyr Zelensky was here for more than warm words and to admire the view. He secured a commitment from the UK to provide unmanned long-range attack drones and hundreds more air defence missiles. On his long-standing plea for fighter jets, however, there was only limited progress.
We want to create this jets coalition, and I'm very positive with it. We spoke about it, and I see that in the closest time you will hear some, I think, very important decisions, but we have to work a little bit more on it.
It is not a straightforward thing, as Vladimir and I have been discussing, to build up that fighter combat aircraft capability. One thing we will be doing, starting actually relatively soon, is training of Ukrainian pilots.
The UK is the biggest donor to Ukraine after the US. It's previously led the way in providing NLAW anti-tank missiles and Challenger 2 tanks. Last week it announced it would be the first country to send long-range Storm Shadow cruise missiles and now unmanned drones capable of striking deep behind front lines. The chair of the Defence Select Committee told me the UK can't always lead the way in supporting Ukraine.
So are you saying that compared to Britain, other countries aren't pulling their weight?
Yeah, I mean, there's the curiosity of what we're seeing here is almost like a bidding war between NATO countries. That isn't the way you're going to take on Russia. We need to be seen as one. We've got countries waiting for others to step forward to expose themselves, and then others follow through. We saw that with the main battle tank, and now there's this hesitance over jets as well.
The closeness of the relationship on show here and further weapons pledges have already led Russia to warn it will only lead to more destruction. Zelensky is returning to a Ukraine preparing for a counter-offensive, heavily dependent on other countries coming good with their support. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
And John is in Dnipro in eastern Ukraine tonight. John, thank you very much for joining us. You're obviously seeing the military situation there firsthand. What's your sense of how close Ukraine is to being equipped and indeed ready for the long-trailed counter-offensive?
Well, Tom, we've seen in the few days that we have been here evidence of a build-up of ground forces, a column of new armoured fighting vehicles heading east this morning, for example. Though, of course, all this is by necessity shrouded in secrecy, as is the whole question of where and when the counter-offensive will come. That is surrounded by a great deal of smoke and a great deal of mirrors. However, it is strange, incredible to think that there are still units fighting here with weapons that date from the Second World War. And if there's been one consistent message from the Ukrainian government for weeks and for months, is that they need more weapons and they need more modern weapons. Now, those long-range drones, as Romilly was mentioning, will be a big help in hitting supply lines, command posts deep behind Russian lines. But when it comes to things like F-16 fighters, well, I have to say, even if they got the green light to get those planes now, it would be many, many weeks before there was the apparatus in this country to support them. At some stage, if this is going to be a spring offensive, President Zelensky is going to have to give the order to go. And what we saw in Bakhmut is just how difficult it will be for them unless they have overwhelming strength on their side.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed. Back here, the impact of the war in Ukraine continues to be felt on the forecourt. Petrol prices pushed up, of course, ever since the Russian invasion began. But a warning today seems to confirm what many have been suspecting for quite some time, that it's not just the big global factors at play. Fuel retailers themselves have been gradually increasing their own margins, the watchdog claims, over years. And the days of supermarkets significantly undercutting their rivals may have come to a spluttering halt.
It's one of the most visible and painful aspects of inflation, and now officials will ask big retailers to justify high fuel prices after finding evidence of increased margins. Candice Mason runs a coach company in Hertfordshire and is convinced fuel prices are not fair.
We are not benefiting from the wholesale price coming down. We were penalised when the wholesale price was going up last year, but it hasn't worked both ways.
Competition officials say last year's pump prices appear to be 5p a litre more than if margins had remained at usual levels. And there's particular concern about diesel, with high margins longer than would be expected. The average price for diesel is now 154.3p a litre, compared to unleaded petrol at 145. Yet, the RAC says the wholesale price of diesel is 4p lower than petrol. Officials say that while supermarkets tend to be the cheapest outlets, evidence from internal documents suggest at least one has significantly increased margins.
Whilst some of the factors driving the price rises have been global factors, including, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there are factors within the control of supermarkets that seem to have been contributing to that increase.
Petrol retailers told us wholesale prices remain volatile. They'll cooperate with officials and are focused on value. But this independent forecourt owner says there's now plenty of scope for price cuts.
I think supermarkets are keeping their prices higher than what they should be. There's no way that we're buying fuel 20 pence a litre cheaper than they are. Like I said, the savings have been coming down for a while now, so I don't understand why the prices aren't dropping across the country.
For many months, drivers have had searching questions about what they're paying at the pumps. Now, perhaps at last, officials will get the answers. Chris Choi, News at 10.
Well, those claims of profiteering are fueling not just the cost of living crisis, but also a new word in our language, greedflation. The idea that inflation is essentially higher than it should be because companies are pushing up prices to protect or indeed expand their profits. And as you would expect, to tell us what's actually happening, Joel is here. I guess the point about this is, we all expect the cost of living to rise, so companies are using that to jack up prices. True or false?
Well, look, there's been some companies that are clearly coining it in, aren't there? You look at, it's been raining oil and gas money for months. For energy companies, their profits are 15 times higher than they were just a couple of years ago. If you look at mobile phone companies, a lot of their contracts, their customers are pegged to price rises above inflation. Windfall time, ka-ching. If you look back just a few months ago, new cars were in such short supply that the price of second-hand cars went through the roof. But analysis by Michael Saunders, a name who may not be familiar to many of our viewers, but who this time last year was setting interest rates at the Bank of England, suggests these are the exceptions to the general rule. Have a look at this. What this will tell us is if you exclude oil and gas companies, the aggregate profits, that's what the line shows, of non-financial companies in the UK actually fell in the year to last September. They're now down at 17% of national income, gross domestic product, and that's close to a 25-year low, Tom. Saunders argues that not only actually are profits being squeezed for most UK companies, but there's evidence that they're running down their deposits at banks too. This, he argues, is actually quite alarming. It's usually a precursor for job losses and for companies to draw back on investment. In the past, though, according to Saunders, the evidence here is completely clear. The overwhelming majority of the rises in inflation we've seen reflects cost pressures from energy and other commodities. Translation, most companies are up against it too. They're passing on their costs where they can to their customers. They're not profiteering.
Joel, as ever, thank you for sorting truth from fiction. Now, let's move on to Turkey, where the race for the presidency will be decided by a second round of voting later this month. The confirmation from the country's Supreme Court comes after yesterday's election failed to deliver the outright majority needed. And while the opposition had begun the campaign confident in their ability to grasp power, it was Turkey's very long-serving incumbent President Erdogan who emerged last night with the upper hand.
He may have come just short of an outright win. But late last night, President Erdogan emerged to throngs of his die-hard supporters, jubilant in the knowledge that he sits in a strong position to win the second round of the presidential vote. And he sounded more than confident. If our nation has made its choice in favor of the second round of the election, he said, then that is welcome. He has been Turkey's almost unassailable president for nearly a decade. Elected, but an authoritarian strongman in style. But few predicted he would be re-elected this time. He's shrugged off many setbacks, but February's catastrophic earthquake brought his standing to a new low. Not just because of what many saw as the slow and unprepared response to the tragedy, but because many saw the inadequately built and regulated buildings as part of President Erdogan's economic legacy. Opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu also had another huge advantage over the incumbent President Erdogan, a plummeting economy with over 40% inflation and a Turkish population fed up with the status quo. But all that wasn't enough to win the first round. He says he won't give up.
Buradayım ve buradayım.
I am here, he said, and you are here with me. I swear to God I will fight until the very end. I am here. Turkey's presidential election matters to Western powers like the UK and America because it is a NATO member. But it's also on the Black Sea with access to both Russia and Ukraine. And whilst it supplies vital drones to Kyiv, it remains on good terms with Moscow. Who is president in Turkey matters, even beyond its borders, and it affects the security interests of Western allies. Ragioma, News at 10.
At least 6 people have died in New Zealand tonight after a fire broke out at a hostel. Emergency services were called to the block in the capital, Wellington, at around midnight local time. Authorities say a number still remain unaccounted for. The fire chief described the blaze as his worst nightmare and said his thoughts were with the victims' families. OK, back here with the UK's latest migration figures, less than a fortnight away, and officials bracing themselves to expose another record peak. The Home Secretary was trying to get on the front foot today. Suella Braverman set out her stall to cut net migration, a pledge repeatedly made by Conservative ministers, as you will recall, and repeatedly missed, which you will also recall. There is, Ms Braverman said, no good reason Britain's own workers aren't up to the jobs. But employers say they're not so sure.
In Kent this afternoon, we found Bulgarian workers busy tending the cherry trees. But the Home Secretary thinks British workers should be trained to do this and other work.
There is no good reason why we can't train up enough truck drivers, butchers, fruit pickers, builders or welders. Brexit enables us to build a high-skilled, high-wage economy that is less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour.
But the owner of the Kent fruit farm says that when it comes to fruit pickers at least, it's not that simple.
No, it's not training. To live in the UK, to satisfy mortgage lenders, to open bank accounts, you cannot do that on seasonal work.
Are your workers from abroad actually counted as migrants anyway?
No, this is why I'm rather perplexed about Suella Braverman. She is the Home Secretary. She has signed the visas for our work permits and they last for 6 months. Everybody who comes to work on this farm or in horticulture can only stay for 6 months, then they leave.
But the Home Secretary is having trouble bringing net migration under control. The last figures showed it running at a record high of 504,000. The next figures, due in 10 days' time, have been predicted to show net migration running at more than 750,000. Yet there are also pressures to keep letting people in. Food industry representatives due to meet the Prime Minister tomorrow say lack of workers is part of what's driving food price inflation.
Labour shortages are definitely part of that. Companies in our sector have offered wage rises in the last year to make sure that they're competitive, that they can get the labour that they need, but labour shortages are definitely adding to inflationary pressures.
And even within government there's debate. Foreign students, for example, are important for funding universities.
We want students from around the world, the best students, the best postgraduate students, to come to our universities, to bring all their intellectual firepower to the universities and to bring the income and economic benefit that comes from those students coming to this country.
And while that debate plays out, there are businesses who depend on foreign workers who remain very nervous about investing. Carlton in News at 10 in Kent.
As the weather finally begins to improve, the quality of water at hundreds of England's beaches and lakes will be monitored weekly with the results published online. It won't in itself stop sewage being discharged into our waters. Don't be ridiculous, that's much too much to expect. But if the spot you fancy swimming in is particularly polluted, at least you'll know about it before diving in.
The perfect weather for a cool off in the sea, but many in Devon would rather stay on top of the water than in it. South West Water was recently fined £2.5 million for illegally discharging sewage.
It makes the water quality a little bit challenging, so we're not advocating people drinking the water. We're advocating people to get on the water and enjoy it safely.
Today marks the start of the bathing season. Every designated site like Firestone Bay in Plymouth will regularly be tested until September.
We're testing for different bacteria, which will give us an indication of how clean the water is. And if we find those bacteria levels are quite high, our scientists will come out and investigate the reasons for them.
In theory, the Environment Agency has the power to prosecute polluters. Ofwat, the regulator, can issue fines too. They've imposed £250 million worth in the last 5 years. But critics say that hasn't significantly hit water companies' profits or improved water quality.
And there's another problem. For each of the 424 bathing sites like Lyme Regis, which are being monitored, there are scores more which aren't, including the area just to the east of this. Now, this used to be designated as clean swimming water, but isn't any longer. Not since the river which feeds it was found to be ecologically dead.
So this water should be just from a storm drain, so it should be just rainwater and no sewage in it at all, which means...
Liz measures ammonia levels in the River Lim every week.
If it's over 1, you should be reporting it, and this is pretty much 6 at the top of the scale.
Where once there were brown trout and otters, now nothing. Volunteers have been sharing their findings with South West Water.
It's taken 18 months for that to build up, but now they do come. But there's so many problems to fix, apparently. They must have built up over decades, that there's still pollution pouring into the river the whole time.
South West Water says it's constantly striving to improve. Pressure is now building on water companies to clean up their act, but there is no quick or cheap solution. Martin Stew, News at 10.
Takes your breath away, that story, doesn't it? Now, finally, almost since the dawn of cinema, filmmakers have been depicting robots as both objects of fascination and sources of complete terror. Well, now artificial intelligence brings with it very real fears for Hollywood's great and good. Tom Hanks is among the latest to speculate on what it could mean for the industry and indeed for him. Death, he says, may no longer be the final frontier if technology allows him to be preserved in eternal youth.
Houston, we have a problem.
As one of Hollywood's biggest names, Tom Hanks is no stranger to mastering technology, whatever the challenge.
Got to reset, restart.
20 years ago, he predicted the rise of artificial intelligence in films, making The Polar Express.
Lead the way.
It was a much maligned CGI animation, but today Hanks says AI will revolutionize the industry.
I could get together and pitch a series of 7 movies that would star me in them, in which I would be 32 years old from now until Kingdom Come. You know, I could be hit by a bus tomorrow, and that's it. But my performances can go on and on and on and on and on.
The latest Indiana Jones film uses an AI program to make Harrison Ford look many years younger, using old footage.
An example of a character being captured in full body motion capture. He's got the gloves, he's got the head rig.
Alan Rankin runs this motion capture technology firm, which allows actors to create a digital twin.
Humans have a really strong capability of understanding or really discerning between real and fake. And until that AI, new technology comes along and disrupts that so that it's not obvious to the human eye that this is a virtual version of this, then I think we're in a good place.
Mississippi. The tech can be used in the wrong hands, as this Russian deepfake advert showed, using Bruce Willis without his permission. But there's no escaping AI's impact on films.
The next step is cinema, and I think he's saying this from a place of truth, from a place of understanding and learning. And I do believe that he is not wrong, that this is the way the industry will go. Whether it's the best thing for the industry, I personally would like to see real humans.
But when it comes to predicting the future, probably best to leave the last word to you-know-who.
Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
Neil Connery, News at 10.
That's it. See you tomorrow. Unless it's a robot, might be an improvement. Good night. Thanks for watching.